The Crypto Markets Update is brought to you by KuCoin, the best place to find the next crypto gem.
Yeah, joining us now to discuss today's brutal market action is Noah Hamman. He's CEO of active ETF manager AdvisorShares. Morning, Noah.
Good morning. How are you?
Well, I'm doing better than the markets, that's for sure.
Right.
So I think the question on everybody's mind today is, why did I lose money last night? What happened?
Yeah, I see a lot of red arrows behind you as well.
Right. There's a lot of red out there all over the place. It's following us. I think it's a little bit of what you guys touched on. I mean, sometimes the answers vary by coin. We mostly focus, in on Bitcoin, but you guys were talking about Ethereum just a moment ago. And I think, like you said, global recession, Fed action getting very aggressive. In some ways, an indication that some of these coins are mainstream is that they're acting like other asset classes in this environment. Ethereum still has, an upcoming merge that it has to tend to. And for those that are experienced and comfortable and knowledgeable and feel good about that, they're probably still actively involved and or trading. But you can imagine a few others in preparation for not only the merge and the changes that can come, but maybe anything that's unexpected. Would cause some concern, and to have a day like today where it's down so significantly, in some ways it's not surprising that you could see that happen. It's just a matter of what day it's going to happen. I don't know that there's anything special about today versus yesterday versus tomorrow, as much as just general weakness in the economy, in speculative assets, in people's willingness to put capital to work, and then some individual complexities depending on the coin.
Yeah. So let's get to the big one. Of course, Bitcoin, 18,000 being that support level we saw back in June. It was able to bounce off of it, testing it again now. Is it going to hold? I mean, do you think it'll hold this time as well as it did last time? It just seems like the enthusiasm, I don't want to say enthusiasm, but certainly a beaten up, sadder market now compared to what we had just a few months ago. Do you really think that 18 will be the support, or do you think that we could break below it?
I hope that it will be, right? So about a month ago, it's probably a month or so, I think I was on actually with you guys, and I was talking a little bit about how our view was we were seeing a floor back then, and that was in the $19,000 and $20,000 range. Now, you always, just for full transparency, right? You always want to be careful of what people say versus what they do. We have a managed Bitcoin ETF with the ticker symbol CRYP that's managed by Mark Yusko and the team at Morgan Creek, but we're only 50% invested right now. So as much as, I believe and I see what could be a floor in the price of Bitcoin, we only have 50% exposure. I think when I was on with you, and it might have been more in July, we were fully invested at the time and kind of rode it up to the probably more than the 21,000 range. And then Mark pulled back half of the exposure, and we missed that run up from about 21 to 23. But in that decline from 23 down, Mark Yusko, yes.
You're not blaming him,
totally
though.
No, I'm totally blaming Mark. I'm just kidding. And I can do it because he can't defend himself. I think he's on a plane right now, traveling around, trying to, help tell the story around Bitcoin. And then he went 50% exposure, though, as I mentioned. So we missed that run up from 21 to 23, but 23 down to where we are today, we've only been 50% exposed. And I think, the message there really for anyone that's watching is, we're in a volatile time. I hope we're at a bottom or have found a floor relative to Bitcoin's price. But being smart with your assets, whether it's value stocks or Bitcoin, quite frankly, you want to have a risk managed approach, and however you want to do that, people can watch your show obviously and get great insight on maybe how they need to be positioning themselves, maybe not minute by minute or day by day, but just having a process to manage risk, I think, is important in volatile assets.
So, Noah, Lawrence hates to ascribe macro factors to the trajectory of Bitcoin, but, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the Fed, which is continuing to push interest rates higher, reduce their balance sheet. And, does it really matter what happens with the merge when it's the Fed controlling the dollar liquidity out there?
I think that it does, and I get his point. There was probably a lot of period of time for Bitcoin where the macro factors probably didn't matter. But to the extent that the goal is to be more mainstream, right, more ubiquitous with whatever you're using to store and transfer assets and value, the more mainstream it becomes, the more I think it's affected by mainstream things. So I do feel like the macro environment, especially as it relates to institutional capital, and then especially as it relates to new money coming in, for us, in our perspective, this ETF is marketed to financial advisors and marketed to self-directed investors. And these are some of the new investors coming into crypto, and they're starting off easy, right? Starting with Bitcoin, starting with a managed solution. And the more you're going to attract traditional mainstream.
So you brought in a chart for us, and we have CRYP, which is one ETF you mentioned, versus ProShares'
BITO.
BITO, BITO. And and you're saying that CRYP is just better actively managed than BITO.
Yeah, and BITO's just long only, right? They're buying the underlying futures. They're not trying to manage risk. They're giving you that exposure. And you can see in that chart, if you jumped in, and that time frame is since CRYP's launch, not since BITO's launch. They launched a little bit before us. But they're down, I believe it's well past actually since their inception, 50%, but just in the time frame we've been open with our product, close to 50%, as you can see on the chart. And you can see, right, we were fully invested when we launched, right, kind of getting our footing. And then as we saw that price decline, CRYP is the only ETF that can react to the changes in Bitcoin that's truly focused on Bitcoin, using the same thing. We use actually the underlying ETFs to get that exposure. So you can see that gap, right, where we got defensive, we started to outperform. You can see that gap narrow a little bit at the beginning of August, where we missed that 21,000 to kind of 23,000 run up. And when I say missed it, I think we were about 50% exposed at the time. But then as it's making that turn in the last month, you can see we're starting to separate again performance. And we'll correlate closely. We're down, but it's going to be a less volatile ride in a managed solution.
All right. But I will just note that ProShares does say that BITO is an actively managed and invests in Bitcoin futures contract.
Yeah, I think they say that because, there really isn't an index for them to follow. They're using futures, and they have to take some discretion to roll those futures. And then there's some concern sometimes, depending on the contract month, about the liquidity. We know this just from the process we went through with the SEC to get these products approved, that from the SEC's perspective and using underlying futures and knowing that there could be, again, capacity constraints, things like that at certain futures contracts, not relative to Bitcoin itself. At least I don't believe that was in part their concern. They didn't feel like anyone really could run a passive strategy, even though when you look at that investment objective of BITO, it's one beta to Bitcoin. It's going to miss a little bit relative to using futures, which isn't the most optimal way, but the only way that the SEC would allow firms like ProShares and others and like us to do it.